Hi, my name is Brian Wassam. I'm a lawyer based in the Detroit, Michigan area, and it's my pleasure to address you at the conference tonight in Seattle. I apologize for not being able to be there live, but I'm definitely thinking about you and about this event as it's happening. I want to thank Dave Lorenzini for inviting me to participate and all the support, moral and otherwise, that he's offered me over the years. You know, there are a few people who have been as avid and consistent of supporters of the augmented reality industry as Dave has been over the years. He has not only a passion, but just a keen insight and intellect for this thing, and a gut sense, a real strong understanding of the technology and the larger trends where it's going in society. So it's an honor to be able to work with Dave, not only in this event, but to help make the augmented reality industry happen. Thanks as well to Kim Schmidt for helping put this event together. Now, what my purpose here today, and I'm going to talk to you for about 30 minutes or so, is to summarize the contents of the book that I wrote and that some of you, I understand, are going to receive a copy of tonight. That book is called Augmented Reality Law, Privacy, and Ethics. This is the corpus so far of my years of work, thinking and writing about the legal implications of augmented reality technology. Something that I've been keenly interested in myself now for several years, been writing about for 8 or 9, and have been blogging for the past 4 at augmentedlegality.com. So one of the joys of being a pioneer and one of the first to write about this stuff is the ability to actually counsel clients in the augmented space and help by contributing my legal talents to helping make that industry come about. Why did I choose the industry of augmented reality to devote my time to so early on? Because like Dave, I've understood now for a while that augmented reality is going to be and has in fact started to become a very big deal in everyday life, in every conceivable way, in every aspect of society, every form of industry. We're already seeing that come to fruition in several ways. The augmented reality itself is really a culmination of so many different technological trends that we've seen play out and that have been inevitable for a long time over the years. That includes mechanical vision. It includes the increasing miniaturization of digital components, of computing technology, and the increasing visual nature of society and of the way we consume information. Think about how much more we consume in pictures and infographics now than we do in text, certainly as compared to prior generations. And we see this inevitability and this culmination, this merging of these different trends into augmented reality, first and foremost in film. Largely science fiction, but even films that aren't very tech oriented in and of themselves will have augmented reality components just as part of the plot devices and part of the situation, the culture and the context in which the future depicted films take place. Even if it's not called out as such, you see things that we would call augmented reality, digital overlays on the real world, just crop up as if they're no big deal. And in fact, that's one of the reasons why I think that they will very soon be not a big deal, but just part of the landscape, part of the culture that surrounds us, part of the inevitable and logical way in which we consume digital information by putting it up front and seamlessly interacting it with the physical world around us. So that one example, of course, is the Iron Man movies. And if you're following along in the infographic slides that I've provided, you'll see a capture from that. When we see Tony Stark walk into a room and he's interacting with digital imagery as if they're physical objects that he can manipulate with his hand and visualize in 3 dimensions rather than interpreting a 2-dimensional drawing. That just makes sense, and that surprisingly is one of the scenes that people remember most when they think about the films. You see, oh wow, that just really clicked. That was so cool how he did that, and that's that reaction, that emotional viscerality of augmented reality is really above and beyond anything else. The strongest argument for why this technology is going to be inevitable and we're going to continue to evolve, because leaving aside the economic trends, the technological trends, anything else, it just feels right. It makes sense. It is the most efficient way to consume digital information in a lot of ways, and really adds value to the physical world around us. So that is a long-winded way of saying this is why both Dave and I and thousands of others think that this is a subject worth exploring, worth getting on the leading edge of, because it's going somewhere. This is a train worth riding. Of course, the economics bear that out. The latest predictions show over 1 billion users of augmented reality applications just within the next 5 years. $3 to $5 billion worth of business following behind that. I think these are trustworthy predictions. How people put numbers on these things exactly, I'm still not quite sure, but I think it's safe to say that this is going to be a very profitable industry going forward in the years ahead. So, what are the legal implications of augmented reality technology as we see it coming to fruition? Now, I think one of the most obvious and top of mind questions when it comes to this technology is the subject of privacy. That's because you can't hardly open a news website anymore without reading a story about privacy these days. The level of sensor technology, the level of surveillance and recording, and the number and breadth and depth of devices that can record nowadays have reached that tipping point where privacy is on everybody's lips, and we may actually see something get done to change and to strengthen privacy rights in response to just the continued expansion of surveillance technology and capabilities. Augmented reality is going to increase that trend, contribute to that trend, and here too we need to think about not just AR in a box, because AR, like any technology, isn't going to be implemented just by itself, but in conjunction with things that we would categorize using other catchphrases, if you will, such as the Internet of Things, which of course is just the distributed network of sensors in a variety of different contexts, a variety of different places and products and devices that will each have the ability to connect not only to the central internet as that continues to evolve, but also to each other, forming mesh subnetworks of exchanges of data. So together with that, and then with the augmented component able to display and augment and add to that information in new and interesting ways, privacy is again going to be a top of mind subject. So when I think about the privacy issues related to augmented reality, the first thing that comes to my mind is facial recognition. Why is that? Well, like any medium of communication, and really when we talk about augmented reality, that's what it is. It's a medium, a place, a means of communicating thought, as much as it is a technology, a hard science of actually facilitating that communication. So just like the internet itself is a medium through which we communicate, the augmented space will be a medium through which we communicate. And as social creatures, we're going to want to communicate with each other. So when we have augmented reality eyewear devices, sensory haptic devices, we're already seeing that we want to use that technology to communicate with each other. Apple Watch, for example, the haptic augmentation, if you will, that device offers, or the very first thing you can do with it is touch it to send a message to another Apple Watch wearer. Google Glass, of course, a prototype of kind of transitional species towards augmented reality eyewear, but again, designed to record and send messages to other people, because that's what we do with our communications technology. And enabling a device to recognize a person and thus augment the view of that person with digital information requires a means of recognizing who that person is. And there are really only so many feasible ways to do that. You're not going to get close enough to a person in everyday conversation to scan their retinas or their fingerprints, for example. And GPS, other transponders are only so reliable. So realistically, the best way to facilitate augmented display of digital data onto a person is by recognizing their face. Again, predicted by the science fiction and related films that we've seen, things like Minority Report, things like the Mission Impossible movies, where we see the implemented use of facial recognition technology in a way that's subtle, but that makes sense, that feels very organically true. We're already seeing this is not just fiction, it's not just speculation. There are already billboards, there are advertising displays that recognize facial features. This is enough of a concern. It's been implemented broadly enough, both in the United States and Europe and Japan, that regulators are starting to pay attention. I myself have had the privilege of participating in a recent series of meetings chaired out of D.C. by a federal commission, federal agency out there that for the past year or more has been attempting to come up with an industry standard set of guidelines to protect privacy, or at least establish expectations of privacy in regards to facial recognition technology. And this implementation of it in marketing contexts and in digital eyewear are very big drivers for the concern of getting these standards in place. So that's already one privacy aspect of augmented reality that's coming to fruition. Another one is similar technology turned around in reverse. So the devices that we wear not only have the ability to project information onto what we see out into the world around us, but also to keep track of the information of the user pointing back at the user. And one implementation of this, one example of this, is the idea of eye tracking, tracking what the user does. In the Google Glass example, because we only have so many commercial examples of digital eyewear to point to yet, but it shows us how some of this technology might be implemented. If you pick up a Google Glass device, it has a sensor that points back towards the user's eye. That's how it's able, for example, to allow the wink to take a picture feature. It wouldn't know you were doing that unless it was watching your eye to see if you were winking. More advanced implementations of this sort of technology and more advanced digital eyewear could, for example, track your eyes to know exactly what you're looking at. In fact, again, if AR and digital eyewear is going to live up to its potential to superimpose digital data on the physical world around us, it's going to have to know what we're looking at. Because it has to be able to precisely overlay its digital information on our field of view, at what, not only what's physically in front of us, but what we're actually looking at. And so that will require more and more advanced eye tracking and recognition of the head location, everything else. And so that's going to require quite a bit of sensors pointing back at the user. And of course, the more such data that is recorded, the more it can be stored and used in ways that perhaps one wouldn't expect. We're already starting to see expressions of these sorts of concerns when it comes to wearable devices in the workplace. Employers, for example, are very eager to take advantage of the chance to monitor their employees. We see this in even some of the primitive wearable technology that's available now in terms of fitness trackers, step trackers, that sort of thing. But in Apple Watch is an example of this too. If employers could use wearable technology to know when an employee is resting, when they are distracted, when they're not paying attention to their assigned tasks, they're going to want to have that data. Surely, slowly perhaps, but definitely surely, they're going to take that data. Just like we see now with Facebook, employers can't resist the temptation to go out and look up that data to see what their employees are up to. If they have the ability to use wearable technology to find that out, they're going to do that. So again, the more data that we're creating, the more potential uses that has. But I want to make sure to convey that I'm not a doomsayer on privacy issues either, because I see in augmented reality, and others see this too, a unique chance to actually enable individuals to protect their privacy, perhaps more than any other digital technology that's available today. It can actually put power in the hands of individual users. How is that? Well, it goes beyond things like on a browser, an internet browser, do not track feature, something like that. This actually puts capabilities in the hands of people to know what technology is around them. An augmented reality device is going to need to, as I mentioned, be in touch with some of these IoT sensors to know what digital data points are available out there to superimpose. But the more we can use digital enhancement to see the things around us, the more we can make decisions based on what those devices see. Case in point, a man named Sander Verhoeven, an augmented reality artist and developer, has already published examples of what this would look like if we could use AR glasses to visualize surveillance cameras and superimpose a cone on our field of view showing this is the range in which that camera can see. And so if I see that superimposed on my field of view as a circle, I know to avoid that. And if I do that, maybe I avoid being seen by those cameras. Dr. Steve Mann, of course, connected with the Meta company and at the University of Toronto, has done a lot of work with this over the years in visualizing surveillance feeds, surveillance fields, he calls them, the scope of space in which a surveillance camera can see, and has speculated on ways that device could even visualize that field for a user and counteract the effects of surveillance on the individual. Other ideas as creative as creating a robots.txt for one's face or for oneself in a public place, somehow coding an ability for the individual using wearable technology and interacting with the cameras around them in an IoT fashion to let them know, hey, I don't give you permission to record me. These are more and more creative ideas. Obviously, there's some technical barriers to implementing some of these solutions, but I think they're exciting and interesting possibilities. And again, if the possibilities exist, if we can dream it, you can bet that someone is going to try and do it. And it's going to be interesting to see that happen. diverting slightly, the same type of subject, but applied to marketing more broadly. So if we have digital eyewear on our faces, the companies providing us with that signal, with that ability to augment, they're going to want to sponsor that content. And just like we see in the internet today, you can bet that the same business models will be ported into the augmented space, meaning we're going to get sponsored advertising in the physical world now, as well as on our computer screens. So several artists have visualized what that would look like. Kishi Masuda is one of my favorites in the domestic RoboCop video, just showing what a crazy world it'll be when literally everything we look at is saturated with advertising. But with advertising comes the law and the regulations that govern advertising, and specifically the laws that are designed to keep that advertising fair and non-deceptive. So when we're superimposing things on our vision to try to advertise a product, the temptation will be there to exaggerate the features and capabilities of that product, and perhaps the method that we use to display it will be itself an exaggeration. That medium will contribute to advertising that is deceptive. Here again, we've had already some legal action that happened in this space. Back in 2011, very early in the augmented age, we had a complaint filed with the Federal Trade Commission over an augmented reality marketing campaign done by Frito-Lay and the Doritos brand. What happened was the Doritos bags had QR codes on the back of them. Again, very primitive AR technology. But a user could buy that bag, hold it up to the webcam on their computer screen, and out comes a Blink-182 concert. And the user can hold it up and move that concert around in 3 dimensions. Well, a group of consumer watchdogs filed a complaint. And this is somewhat short of a lawsuit, but it was still a very serious allegation that this advertising campaign was deceptive, that it was unfair advertising. The argument is one that I, put it mildly, don't find persuasive. The argument was that teenagers specifically, who were the target market for these Doritos bags, were particularly susceptible to influence from digital media, and in fact that the augmented reality experience here was so effective, was so good, that the teenage brain was incapable of distinguishing between the reality and the fiction, and thus were basically brainwashed into buying Doritos. Now, if these companies were selling vegetables, you can bet these consumer groups wouldn't be filing complaints about it. But because they were selling fatty foods, they decided to lodge this complaint and cook up this social science explanation for why it was a bad thing. To my knowledge, nothing's ever been done on that complaint. It doesn't look like anything will, but that just goes to show that these new forms of expression will upset the apple cart and cause disputes, sometimes in ways that nobody can predict. All right, moving forward now to intellectual property. I want to touch a couple bases on how IP and AR will intersect. Let's break up intellectual property into its constituent parts. The first being the law of copyright, and this is the law that protects an author's creative expression. The first question here is, will augmented content itself be copyrightable? Can the expressions, the imagery that coders and software developers come up with be protected? And here, there's some interesting questions, and augmented space specifically will make it difficult for a lot of creations to be protected. Why do I say that? Because the idea of a lot of augmented content will be to replicate the physical world around them, to create digital replicas of things that are actually physical, because inherently augmented content is made to appear as if it's part of the physical world. Well, when we do that job too well, when we replicate something that's real too well, then we're not creating any new expression. We're not coming up with anything that's protectable by the law of copyright. Again, if you're following along in my slides, you'll see a picture of a series of digital mesh models of vehicles. This comes from a copyright case that I actually myself had the opportunity to participate in. And the bottom line from that case was that digital models of real-world vehicles were not themselves copyrightable, because they created nothing new. They were just replicas of something that already existed. So when that happens in the augmented space, we're likely to see the same result. Now, on the flip side of that, creating things that are physical but not necessarily pure replicas, slavish copies of things that already exist, will be protectable. And the fact that they're changeable, that they're alterable, the fact that they are three-dimensional digital representations won't stop that from happening. We saw that just last year in a piece of litigation in New York that had to do with a world in Second Life, an island in Second Life that a developer created for their client, and the court found that to be protectable. But on the flip side, how will the use of augmented reality to display content have the potential of infringing other people's rights and copyright? Well, here again, because the augmented space, just to take one example, because the augmented space is a public display or performance of a work in a new and unanticipated way, in a lot of cases, we're likely to see content that is licensed for particular uses, particular displays, perhaps private displays, now being tied to physical targets, physical anchors in the real world that are very much in public places. So we're likely to see some, just as we do every time a new medium shows up, like the internet itself, we're likely to see some violations of copyright licenses as people take liberties that the copyright owners themselves never envisioned. Another facet of intellectual property law is the law of trademarks. And that, of course, is the use of words or logos to represent a commercial entity in the marketplace. One of my favorite examples of how augmented reality can be used to tweak trademarks goes back to 2011. Where Professor Mark Skwarek out of NYU used AR to superimpose a leaky oil pipe on the BP oil sign, so that every time anyone held their phone up to a BP sign, they would see this. This, of course, was during the Gulf oil spill. And so while I'm not aware of any legal challenge coming out of that use, it certainly shows how AR can be used to repurpose trademarks in the marketplace, and certainly trademark owners themselves are going to have strong feelings about that. Where I see this coming very soon in the near term to litigation is in the field of not so much political statements like Mark's, but rather the physical 3D version of keyword advertising. You know, when we do a Google search now, we see a whole list of results that are all ads, and we know that they're ads, but they're tied to the subject matter that we searched. Well, by the same token, when we're using AR to recognize things in the physical world, if those are trademarks, and as a result, our AR app gives us advertisements for competitors tied to that AR search and superimposed on our field of view, you can bet the same people that have filed lawsuits over keyword advertising are going to file lawsuits over that as well. Another facet of intellectual property is, of course, the law of patents. Here's where we've seen probably the most active actual litigation happen already in the augmented space, and that is a result of a few different what we call patent trolls, people who own patent rights but don't actually practice them. They just use those rights to go out and sue other people. The most infamous of these is a company called Lennon Image Technologies, which held a patent that it enforced against companies using AR apps on websites to use webcams to superimpose products onto the user, basically what we call virtual try-on sites. So, for example, the Boucheron site would use AR. If one held their hand up to the webcam, they would superimpose a ring there, and you could see it in 3 dimensions, move it around. Companies like Ditto that do the same thing for eyewear for people who use the webcams with their face. Lennon shut all these companies down with their lawsuits. And what really hurts is that companies like this, they don't sue the developers who actually make the virtual try-on programs, the people who have an interest in protecting these products. Now, they sue the end user, the retailer, Macy's, Boucheron, people like that, who don't want to spend their money defending a patent lawsuit. So what happens is they give up the app right away, and they give in to the lawsuit. They pay some money to make it go away, and no other company wants to pick up this technology because they don't want to get sued. That puts a lot of economic burden on these small developers that are making the technology. So really puts them in a bind, and it's created an unfortunate result. Hopefully we don't see too much more of that in the augmented space. We'll move on briefly to the concept of property rights. So if in the real space, in the real world, we have property lines and that say, this is my space, on the other side of the line is your space, you can't put up a sign in my space. Augmented reality blurs those lines. It allows us to point our camera at someone's physical property and see content that anybody wants to put there. If they've pre-programmed the app or scanned in a target that happens to be on that space, you're going to see whatever digital content you want. We're likely to see, I think, some interesting disputes between property owners and augmented reality companies over who has the rights to augment that space. So this is a question rather that I've seen posed quite a bit in commentary and news articles and just from average users. It makes sense intuitively. Again, because augmented reality content appears to be real, it appears to be physical. Our natural response is to say, well, you can't make that physical thing appear on my property. Of course, this is where it becomes important to realize that it's not really there. It's only a piece of code, a piece of imagery that appears on your phone, your mobile device, your eyewear. It's not really there. So the fact that it's made to appear as if it is in a particular physical place, more often than not, is not going to have anything to do with the rights of that physical landowner. Rather, I believe it's going to be a form of speech. The courts will say, the fact that you chose to make this imagery appear as if it's there is your expressive choice, and that is going to be a choice protected by the First Amendment. But it'll be interesting to see how that shapes out in real life. From there, my book, it raises some interesting questions, I think, that go beyond what we might normally think about. So, for example, criminal law or tort law, which is the private lawsuit that one brings for physically injuring someone. What about the concept of assault? If you think of the term assault and battery, what we mean by assault is an act that basically frightens someone and causes them to fear being harmed. Interesting ways that this can come about. Again, no one, to my knowledge, has been yet harmed in this way, or even assaulted in this way. But we've seen some very creative and provocative uses of AR advertising, kind of stealth, rogue advertising, in ways that surprises the consumer, shocks them by using AR overlays, glass displays, bus shelters, things like that, to make it appear as if things are jumping out at them or explosions are happening, that sort of thing. Things that are meant to freak the customer out to get their attention. Well, the better these things work, the more the customer is likely to actually be afraid. And we've seen examples where a customer will get up and run away thinking that what they're seeing through this transparent piece of glass is actually there on the other side, when in fact it's not. So with the first time that someone actually hurts themselves as a result of experiencing AR in this way, we're going to see some interesting consequences. And in fact, I as a lawyer have had the opportunity to talk to personal injury lawyers who do this for a living, and they're licking their chops waiting for the first augmented ambulance to chase, if you will. And there are a number of ways people can allege to have been harmed by these devices. There's a lot of studies that have been done by MIT and others that talk about the consequences of wearing digital imagery, or at least seeing digital images that don't quite line up the way they should with the physical world. Making something appear as if it's there in a way that is convincing is really hard to do from a technological standpoint. And that remains true, even though we've seen so much advancement in that space. So when things are just a little bit off, users are going to get sick. It's going to be like the Blair Witch Project everywhere, if you will. That experience that just throws you off a little bit and makes you dizzy, makes you sick. And the more widespread that is, that's just another theory that people will use to allege harm from these devices. One additional and important context for injury to happen as a result of AR, of course, will be in the automotive space. We already are far too familiar with the effects of a distraction on drivers, and the more content we put in front of their eyes through augmented means, the more possibility there is for distraction. But there again, I want to be careful and hasten to add that just like with the privacy context, augmented reality offers a host of potential for improving the driving experience, if done correctly. And as we're already seeing this morning, I read another article about augmented reality goggles being prepared for the driving experience. If this information can be taken off the dashboard and put in a heads-up display, both navigational and safety information, there's real potential there for that, adding to the safety of the driving experience. Briefly, I'll mention the criminal context. Of course, anytime we have a new medium of communication, as we've seen with the internet, people with criminal intent will take advantage of that, and that's going to be the same in the augmented space as well. We've seen a number of concept displays, concept art showing augmented messages on top of houses saying, this house is empty, or owners haven't been here in 2 weeks. Feel free to rob, or this has this sort of TV in the house. Keep an eye on this one. That sort of thing, just making it that much easier for criminals to do their thing. On the flip side, of course, we've seen already companies like Stalker and others with their Cop Tracks product getting on board and using wearable and augmented technology for the law enforcement side of things as well. Interesting twist on civil rights laws. So one chapter of my book is devoted to the ways that AR can help not only add to the everyday experience of normally abled people, but add to the experience of those whose abilities are limited already by physical disability and mental disability and otherwise. And we've already seen, even with the Google Glass project, we saw one of the best stories that came out of that technology was the way that Google Glass devices improved the lives of those with physical disabilities. People who couldn't use their hands, couldn't use their legs, and yet they were able to manipulate a camera and conduct internet searches just by using the voice commands on the device on their face. So there is so much room for improving the lives of such folks using this sort of technology that I think it won't be long at all before the law requires these sorts of accommodations for disabled disabled folks, and I see that in my book, I've laid out a few examples of how we've already seen this happen with, for example, streaming video. Netflix is now required by law to put subtitles on all of its programs, or rather closed captioning on all of its streaming content. And that's something we never would have seen before, but now that it's so easy to do and an actual achievable goal, it very soon became a legal requirement. Same way for the abilities that augmented and wearable devices will offer. Finally, in the last couple of minutes, my comments here, I'd like to mention things that go a little bit beyond the legal rules, the what's lawful, what's unlawful, what's criminal and not, and how that affects what I've broadly termed in the book as ethics or civil society. And there are a couple interesting developments here. The more we rely on digital technology superimposed on our world, the more separated we're going to be from each other in a very tangible and physical sense. So, and there are a couple illustrations here that are a little bit more comical than others, but think about how much time we already spend staring at our devices, our computer screens. And it's rare that we get a break, but when we do, we get a break. We can actually interact with people and with our physical surroundings. But when we have augmented eyewear on our faces 24/7, we're never going to be separated from the digital world. We'll never have an excuse to take them off and just enjoy the physical world as it really exists. And there are going to be consequences for that. We've already seen that with phones, and that it's just going to be that much more accentuated when digital content is truly everywhere. And there are consequences for our cohesion as a society. We've already reached a point now in our political culture in the U.S. where everything is so polarized, so divided on every issue. There's left and right. There's conservative and liberal, and very little room left to be in the middle. And one thing that contributes to this is the availability of selecting voices that we want to listen to. We call this groupthink. Political groupthink, where the more we tune into voices we want to hear, we don't hear opposing viewpoints, and we're able to limit out things that would challenge us from challenging our own ideas and our own assumptions. AR, by putting that information not only in our media but on our physical world, putting that media on top of what we experience, will only accentuate that problem. And there's been some real interesting commentary to this effect in the Atlantic magazine and some other sources that I talk about a little bit more in the book. One scenario for this happening is the ability of AR, again using facial recognition technology, to literally put labels on people. So you tie in someone's face with their voting record or their transaction histories. You can just look at someone and say, okay, that's that type of person. That person voted Republican, or that person voted Democrat. That person voted for this proposition or owns this sort of car. Real scary and slippery slope a type of stuff to just really completely undermine the ideas, the civil society ideas that hold us together as a nation. Not to say that any one of them will bring us to the tipping point, but collectively it can start to be a concern. There are some individual ethics concerns as well. The AR has more than once been described as a superpower, something that gives an individual an advantage over others around them because they have, a unique digitally enhanced view of the situation or access to particular information. And there have been a number of interesting and somewhat disturbing examples in some of the concept art, that some of which are illustrated in these slides, and some of which are explained a little bit more in the book, that highlight this in not a good way. The fictionalized stories that we see are all those kind of wish fulfillment fantasy type things, which individuals choose to take advantage of other individuals based on this extra digital information that they have available. Not to say, of course, that that's how it's going to be with everyone, but the fact that this theme repeatedly shows up in the concept art and the fiction that we have about this technology reflects a certain something about how people are planning to use it and how they see that it's natural to use it. And that's not a great sign for where this technology could take society. Final point is the reinforcement of destructive behavior, taking the idea of groupthink into a more individual direction here. And two of the subjects that I explore in this chapter are those of addiction and pornography. So these are, again, both behaviors, both aspects of society that very much exist today and are very much private activities, and they become problems when they are taken to extremes and within the realm of one's private existence. So when AR allows us to take our private world and take it everywhere, superimpose it everywhere, again, just magnifying the possibilities for behavior that's already counterproductive, that's already destructive to the individual, and just accentuating that. The one example I talk about in the book, and some of you may be familiar with, is the story of Reginald Barclay from Star Trek: The Next Generation, who himself becomes hooked to the holodeck, which, of course, holodeck is very much a reference point for today's discussion of augmented reality, because it functions in very much the same conceptual way. So the more we immerse ourselves in a fake, constructed digital reality, as Reginald Barclay did, we can kind of lose hold of that, our grip on that reality, and choose to embellish the digital over the physical, over the real, so much that it becomes mentally unbalancing for us. Of course, none of this is meant to be doomsaying. None of this is meant to condemn augmented reality as a medium. Rather, it's meant to be realistic. We see the internet having the same effect on people, but this is just taking that a couple orders of magnitude higher when augmented reality allows us to bring not only the internet, but the combination of the digital and the physical with us everywhere we go. So I think I've reached my allotted time and maybe gone a couple minutes over that. I apologize for that. I hope you found this discussion interesting, as I do. I think this stuff is fascinating, which is why I spend so much time thinking about it and writing about it. And I hope that you will get a chance to take a look at my book and my blog. And if any of you are interested in pursuing your own ideas for this industry, I'd love to have the chance to talk to you, to meet with you, and help you, as I've had a chance to do with some others, to navigate the legal issues around this technology and help bring it to reality in a way that benefits everybody. So thank you for listening. Again, Dave, Kim, thank you for giving me the opportunity to address this group, and best wishes to all of you.